All right, welcome in our second of two broadcaster reunion and Zoom chats as we move along throughout the day, throughout the history of the broadcast booth with the Louisville Redbirds and Louisville Bats. I'm Nick Curran. Jim Kelch, the voice of the Redbirds / River Bats / Bats for some 21 seasons back here. And, all of us have worked with Jim in the booth at some point, the common thread from us all. We've got some other guests here. Of course, he was in the booth for the Redbirds with Jim from 1992 to 1994. Has gone on to work for ESPN, a number of other places, the San Diego Padres as well. Mark Neely with us. Mark, welcome.
Nick, how you guys doing? It's a pleasure to be here. By the way, first off, thanks for putting Joe Buck and Todd Callis, who came before me on the other episode, and saving the heavyweights for this one.
Well, I think the younger folks for this one was what we were doing.
I'll accept that. I'll accept the youth. Kelch can't accept that, but I'll accept it.
Yeah, well, he's spanned all generations, as it were.
Yes.
Next up, we have who worked with Jim from 1995 to 1997, got to be on the call for a 95 American Association Championship, and a lot of stuff we've had going on with that at the Bats here in the last couple of weeks. Has gone on to work Kent State women's basketball, the Akron Rubber Ducks, a number of other places. Dave Wilson joining us. Dave, thanks for being here. How are you?
Great, Nick. Pleasure to be here. Really appreciate you arranging all this and getting us all together like this.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and Jim a big part of it too. And last but not least, man that worked with Jim for quite a while and then worked solo for a while and then worked with me for a while. The reason I'm here, he was in the Bats broadcast booth from 2003 to 2016, the middle of that season now with Ohio State, calling women's basketball, baseball, and doing sideline for football along with work at the radio station up there. Matt Andrews, good to see you.
How you doing? Good to see you guys. Nick, thanks for doing this. And yeah, Jim, you're the common thread here, and I know we're all appreciative for what you meant for us in our careers.
I appreciate that, Matt. And I was just thinking, other than me, you are the longest running Louisville announcer. In fact, you and I are the only ones that have reached double digits. I think that's correct. Isn't that right?
Yes.
I believe so. I think so.
Got 3 years. I got 3 years.
I'm not sure how long Matt Gorski lasted in the booth, but I think I hit double figures.
Well, Matt Gorski barely made single figures, but that's a whole nother story.
Yeah, well, it sure is.
I just want to add that Mark and I, we really admire Matt because he was the guy who was actually able to outlast Jim Kelch and take over the top spot.
Yeah, I was entrenched. I had cement blocks on my feet. I wasn't going anywhere. Not by my own volition, but the way it worked out.
Well, I think listeners here were very lucky for that, too, to have a chance to hear you for all the years that they did, and me among them. Want to start by going around the room and just how you ended up in Louisville and well, as it were, working with Jim to start it out. We'll start with Mark. He came first. We'll start with you.
Yeah, that was only my third year in pro baseball. In 1990, I got my first job out of the baseball winter meetings and went to Boise in the Northwest League, which was an Angels affiliate. I'm a St. Louis born and raised guy. So my second year in 91, I got a job with the Cardinals. It was an owned and operated team in Springfield, Illinois, Springfield Cardinals in the Midwest League. And then the opportunity came when Todd Callis left for the number 2 job. I'm like, hey, a chance to be number 2 at AAA in Louisville. So that's how I got the job. In fact, I remember Jim Kelch and Dale Owens and I think Tab Brockman all came to St. Louis for some reason. And I actually interviewed initially in St. Louis. I just had to drive from my home in West St. Louis.
Oh, well, there we go. You're back. Yeah. That is awesome. Dave, how about you? How did you end up in Louisville on the heels of Mark?
I was sort of a similar story. I was fairly early in my career, Nick. I was working for a Class A team down in Columbus, Georgia. I'm from Indianapolis originally, so I was familiar with a lot of the American Association teams, particularly Indy and Louisville. But somewhere along the line, I just started to reach out to different teams, sent my stuff to Dale. And, sometime late in that 1994 season, they called, said they might have an opening if I might be interested. And of course was, and ended up there for 3 years.
Indeed. And then, we mentioned Matt Gorski, and then Jim worked solo for a few years. And then in 2003 came along Matt. How did you wind up there?
Well, let me start by saying I think we all owe a great debt of gratitude to the late Dale Owens. I mean, it seems like that's the common theme and bond here for all of us. And Dale was integral, along with Jim, in my arrival in Louisville. I was finishing up at Ohio State in 2002 and had been doing a couple of years of independent pro ball here at Chillicothe, Ohio. And the other connection for myself and Jim is Bill Lee, who runs, at the time, the Frontier League, and it's still in existence. But he was Jim's general manager for Jim's first baseball job. Was it first or second job, Jim? Second job in Chattanooga. And Bill Lee, the league commissioner in the Frontier League, after my second year, gave me a call out of nowhere one day and said, "Hey, I've talked to Jim, and they would like for you to apply for the job in Louisville as the number 2. They were doing a number of TV games, and they wanted somebody to be kind of the mainstay on radio when Jim did television." And so that's how I got involved fall of 2002, my last quarter at the time. They were on quarters at Ohio State. And I went down and interviewed and got the job, but was told, incidentally, that in order to get the job and to go do a game, any game at all, you have to go sell. And I'd never sold anything in my life. What do you sell, Do you sell tickets? And so that was the Dale Owens aspect. And I didn't do a great job, but I gave the effort, and that pleased Dale enough to allow me to get on the radio there in April of 2003.
Well, I don't think that any of us, and Nick, I know you sold also, but all of us were hired with the idea that we also had to sell. And Dale and Tab and that whole group of people, Greg, always thought, you guys are salespeople who also broadcast during the season. But we always thought of ourselves as broadcasters who had to sell in the off season. And I think what Matt said is none of us were overly good at it, mainly because we didn't care about it. It was an area of the job and a time of the year that we just had to get through. We just got through it. And then once March rolled around, then we would start thinking about baseball. And if we had to, think about sales. You guys agree with that?
Yes.
100%.
As the full-time person still with the team, in case anyone watches this that is in charge of me, no, I don't agree with that at all.
For the record.
Very
Yes.
diplomatic response.
For the record. Jim, what about your first impressions of these fellas?
Well, let's see. Matt was telling the story about how I was involved in his hiring, but with Mark and with Dave, it was more of a Dale Owens thing. Would you guys agree with that? I mean, I remember Mark's story about going to St. Louis. I don't know what we were doing there, but I remember going over there and Dale saying, "Hey, we're going to interview an announcer while we're in town." And I'm like, what are you talking about? So Mark had been in touch with Dale, maybe even Greg, I'm not sure, to talk about the job in Louisville way before they let me know about it. And so I remember Mark had been in Springfield, which I knew a little bit about Springfield because, one, I'm from Peoria, Illinois, and Springfield, we used to go to Springfield to watch games when the Cardinals AAA team was there. And so I knew about Springfield. I knew Mark had done some games and had connections with the Cardinal organization. So I remember when he came on thinking, well, it doesn't have the bloodlines that Joe and Todd have. We'll see what's going on. Not all the same son that I've worked with here. But it worked out pretty well. And Mark has that dry sense of humor. He was always like throwing things in there, it's like, what are you talking about? And he'd be laughing in the background, it's like, oh, I think he just got me again. And then with Dave, really it was the same story. When Mark left after 94, and where did you go, Mark, did you go to Tulsa right then?
Yeah, I did. It came down. I was a was for the job in Buffalo with Jim Rosenhaus. It came down to us two. And I had the offer from Tulsa in the Texas League at the same time, and I was putting them off, and Jim eventually got the job, and I went to Tulsa. But to get back to your point from when you came to St. Louis, I think what helped me, if you remember, our games not only were on in Louisville that first year, but they were on in St. Louis as well.
Yes,
so a St. Louis AM station picked up our games, and the fact that I was from St. Louis, I think, helped, because I immediately became aware of how little lack of pull you had in the organization. So I wasn't kissing your behind. It was all Dale. It was from Dale for sure.
Yeah, I was entering, I think when you got there in 92 and certainly into your latter stages and then into the Dave Wilson era, yeah, if somebody's career up and down on a roller coaster, I think at the end of yours, Mark, at the beginning of Dave's, I was on the downhill of the roller coaster ride in Louisville for one reason or another. So then you left, and then Dave, the same thing. I wasn't really aware that they were talking with Dave about coming in and how that was going to work. And all of a sudden, Dale said, "Hey, we've hired somebody to talk to you." Dave, I don't recall meeting you in an interview setting at all.
No, I think the first time we met, I had stopped up at Louisville during Christmas vacation. This was maybe a couple of years before, when there wasn't even a job open. And I think I was traveling home to Indiana for the holidays and set up a time to stop by. And I think you and Dale and me and my wife all just sat there in the stadium club and chatted a little bit, but it wasn't for a job, or it was just me trying to meet people.
Yeah. Okay. So then you came on and would have been 95, the championship year. And I think you're the only one of the group that actually then went on to do hockey.
Right.
Greg earlier in the other podcast was talking about when the team owned the hockey franchise, you made the transition over to hockey, and it was good in one respect, I remember, because again, getting back to the sales thing, you hated sales, and doing hockey was not about so much doing hockey, but getting out of the sales game. Dale said, if you do the hockey, you don't have to sell, and your hand went up, and you said, I'm in.
Yeah, it was you don't have to sell as much.
Oh, I thought you didn't have to sell at all.
Which to me meant don't sell at all.
Hey, Dave, can I interject here? Let me tell a story about Kelch here.
Oh,
Now,
boy.
I actually did do one season for the Louisville Ice Hawks before the Louisville baseball team took over management of the hockey team. You may remember that, Jim. I got a call from Dave Alcorta, who ran the Ice Hawks, and that's when John Owlers left, who's now been with the Anaheim Ducks for many years. And I did 1 year, and then the team folded. And how I found out the team folded is you and I are in Omaha at Rosenblatt Stadium doing the game, and somebody gives you the ticker wire, and it would have the transactions. And I had no idea that the team was folding. And you go, and you read on air, Louisville Ice Hawks announce the ending of their franchise. And I looked at it like, give me that pink slip right there that you have in your hand. So how I found out that I lost the job for the Ice Hawks is you reading it next to me on the air in Omaha.
I don't remember, but that's a great story. Wow. Yeah.
So Dave started to steal the thunder. That was before Dale and the group bought the hockey franchise, and it disappeared for a while before that.
Yeah, they brought it back as the River Frogs, and
Yeah.
the job fell in my lap because Jim didn't want to do it, and he was wise to not want to get involved with it, and so I became the most unqualified, reluctant broadcaster in the history of hockey. But
Had you done hockey?
I'd never done a hockey game in my life before my first broadcast with the River Frogs. I think that was. I went and watched a couple of the exhibition games just to try to figure out what was going on, and then it was opening night, and just making my way through it.
Wow. It had to be harder because I had never done a hockey game on radio either, but I had grown up around hockey, growing up in St. Louis and being a Blues fan, et cetera. So that had to be hard not growing up around the game to do it.
Well, Dave mentioned they came to me to do the games, and that's true. I had actually played 3 years of hockey in high school, And then in Peoria, right before I left Peoria, I did 2 years of the Peoria Rivermen. Back in those days, they were in the International Hockey League. And then I got the job in Chattanooga. So I actually had some hockey experience, but even when I did the games, I was never really comfortable doing them. So when Dale came to me and said, hey, would you want to do the hockey? I was like, no, I don't want to do the hockey. And so Dave got the job, and I'll never, ever forget this. A big meeting in the in the office at Old Cardinal Stadium with all the people in there when they bought the hockey team. We were getting ready to go. And the people that ran the club, including Dale, stood up and said, we are buying this hockey team. We're going to run this hockey team, but in no way, shape, or form will it interfere with what we're doing with the baseball team. Baseball is number one. Hockey is number two. And everybody said, okay, great. Well, it couldn't have been any further from the truth.
Right.
Because in a matter of weeks, everybody was a hockey expert. Dave, you agree?
Oh, there's no question about it. And, guys like Gary Ulmer and Dale, Tab, Dave Arnold, they were constantly talking hockey, talking strategy, what Warren Young should be doing, what lines should be put together. It was nonstop hockey talk.
Everybody was a hockey expert, but no one had ever seen a hockey game before.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The only guy that didn't take part in any of those discussions was the broadcaster, because I was still trying to learn the 3 rules.
Including some of the terminology like one-timer.
Yeah, I was throwing around the one-timer for every shot, because I heard the way I tried to prepare myself for the season was to listen, Mark, you'll appreciate this, to Ken Wilson doing blues games. And I heard him a couple of times say one-timer, really cool. Now, I had no idea what it was. I was not a hockey person. So we start doing River Frogs games. I'm saying one-timer on every shot. And finally, a player named Eric Johnson approached me. And apparently he had been watching some video of a game or something, and my broadcast was on it. And, he pulled me aside and suggested that I probably should tweak that a little bit, because only a one-timer is a certain kind of shot. So I owe him a lot that I didn't go through the whole season like that.
Funny.
Setting you straight. What about your first impressions of Matt, Jim?
Well, I had done a couple of years by myself after the Matt Gorski fiasco of 2000, which led him out of town. We all needed a break. So I did the rest of 2000, 2001, 2002 by myself. And then I thought, you know what, I really need to get somebody in here. And as Matt had said, we were going to do some TV. And so we wanted someone qualified to do the games with me, or when I was on TV, do the radio. And I remember thinking, we really need to get somebody in here who can potentially move up and who's earned it and who's good. Who do I know that might know some people? Because I didn't want to open it up to have all these tapes coming in and all that kind of thing. Who do I know that might know of some young broadcasters? And as Matt mentioned, our friend Bill Lee, whom I had worked for in Chattanooga for 2 years, was running the Frontier League, still is running the Frontier League. And so I called him and I said, who do you have in your league that could come up here and work AAA? And he said, I only have one guy that can fit in with you. And I said, what do you mean by that? He said, do the games, go out at night, have some fun, not be a stick in the mud. Only one guy that can do that, Matt Andrews. And he said, I'll contact him and have him send you a CD. So he did. And I remember listening to it the first time thinking, oh, that's pretty good, but I got to get into this thing a little bit more and really pick it apart. And, the more I listened to it, I thought, God, this guy's pretty dang good. And so we got him in there. We had lunch at the ballpark, and we used to be Brownings. And, we talked and everything. And I said, hey, I'd hire you right now to be the number 2 broadcaster, but you got to go meet with James Breeding and talk about sales. And like he said, sales, what do you mean? What would I be selling? Like, what, signs and radio. program ads and tickets and all that good stuff. And so he met with James, and he went through the winter, and he had to go through the off season. And then if he did a good enough job, then he could take over the broadcasting part of it too. So it was conceivable that he could have worked in the January and February and March and not cut muster, and they'd have said, see ya. But he worked out well, and I was really grateful to have a partner again, because as you guys know, AAA travel can be a real pain in the butt in terms of getting up at 4 a.m., catching a 6 a.m. flight to whatever city, getting in at 1 in the afternoon or 1:30, and going to the hotel, checking in, getting some lunch, and boom, immediately out to the ballpark, because you don't have the engineer to set everything up. You got to do that yourself. You got to get your pregame interview, which was the albatross for all of us every day. And then, by the third inning, you were exhausted. So after doing that for 2.5, almost 3 years by myself, I thought I really have to get somebody in here. And Matt fit in right away. I mean, he really did. We got along great. We roomed together, and we had a great time. All of you guys. I mean, we all had a good time when we were working together, and we all have some great stories to tell. And most of them will come out during this podcast.
Let me interject with something from the opening trip, because as you know, Jim, we didn't travel. I mean, we were doing division games and traveling, but when you went to Norfolk and Durham, you went, and I stayed back to sell. Well, the opening trip, the Bats opened on the road that year. They were in Toledo, and normally I would not be on that trip. First year guy, whatever. But the home opener was going to be on television. And naturally, you wanted me to get on the radio and have some innings before we got back home for that home opener, which I'd have all 9 innings in the home game for you going to TV. And we're in Toledo, and I'll never forget, Corky Miller was in the lineup on opening day. I think he batted 8th and was the first batter that stepped to the plate in the 3rd for Louisville. But the point is, after the game, and I'm riding this high, it's freezing cold up there in Toledo, Fifth Third Field. We're having a great time. The game's over. The Bats, I think they lost the opener or whatever, snowing outside. We go across the street, grab a drink, something to eat, and you get a phone call from Sven Jansen, the media relations PR director of the Bats. And Sven, among others, had heard rumblings from the higher ups. I won't mention his name. What in the world is Andrews doing on the opening road trip? Didn't know I was going, didn't know I was going to be on the first game, completely caught off guard that I was on that series. Couldn't believe they'd take a rookie on that first trip. And, to your defense, your point was, hey, we're breaking this guy in. He's going to have the home opener. But just the fact that they didn't know that I was going to be on the road, it made me feel great.
Well, the best part of that opening road trip was certainly a lot of that stuff. But that was Dave Miley as the manager.
Yes.
And so we do the game. It is bitter cold, as you say. We have the windows open because we always have the windows open. And right. The game ends. And so now I get to really see, is what Bill Lee told me about Andrews true, or is it not true? Because we were in Toledo, and when you're in Toledo, that means Jim Weber. And when we were with Jim Weber, we just kind of go where he says. And at the time, the little bar across the street was the Bronze Boar, still is there. And that's where we hung out. And Dave Miley was never a guy that turned down a post-game drink. So that whole crew is over there at the Bronze Boar, and we go over. If the game was at, 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, by the time we got out of the Bronze Boar, it was probably 10 o'clock at night. So we had spent a lot of time over at the Bronze Boar after the game. And whether you wanted to stay that long or not, you did stay that long. So you earned a lot of early points in that first game by going to the Boar.
Big time stuff. The Bronze Boar. Now it's the Dirty Bird. You never know where Webley's going to have you.
That's right. That's right. Now here's Dave Wilson will appreciate this story. 95 playoffs, and we're out in Buffalo for the finals. Remember, we had swept Indy 3-0 in the first round, and we're out in Buffalo, and they were juggling the times, remember, Dave, at the start of those games out there, because the Sabres were in the Stanley Cup finals that year, remember, against the Dallas Stars. And one of the games out there got moved up earlier, because the hockey game was at 7. I think the baseball game might have been at 4. Do you remember that?
That sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we go back to the hotel. We're staying at the Holiday Inn downtown, and then we go across the street to Coulter Bay. Remember the little bar restaurant? Niels, you remember that place, Coulter Bay?
Too well, yeah.
Yeah. So we go over to Coulter Bay, and it's jam-packed full of people because they're watching the hockey game. So we're into the hockey game, and there's bodies everywhere. You can never sit that close now. And there happened to be a group of people sitting to my left, and they're watching the game, and they're like, gosh, I hope this game doesn't end 2-3 like the other games have ended. I hate that score, 2-3.
2-3.
Well, I just couldn't let it die. I'm listening, and so I turn and tap the woman on the shoulder, and I say, excuse me, ma'am, I noticed you said the score of the game was 2-3. And she goes, yeah, we lost 2-3. It was really nuts. I'm like, well, in sports, you always say the larger score first. The final score of that game was 3-2. And she goes, no, it wasn't. It was 2-3. Out here in Buffalo, we always say our score first. I'm like, I never heard that. She goes, oh yeah, only in Buffalo we say our score first and then the other teams. Like, oh, well, thanks for that information. You remember that? 2-3.
Yeah, I think of that in the Twitter age. Anytime I see that on a tweet that says the lower score first, I will reply with big score goes first. And I always think of Jim when I do that.
Great Monte Cristo, by the way, at Coulter Bay.
Who did?
The Monte Cristo at Coulter Bay was
very, very good at there. Yeah. Yeah.
Hey, since we're talking about Buffalo, hey, Nick, can I get permission from you to tell a PG story here involving hockey and baseball in Buffalo?
Oh, please.
Jim may remember
You don't need permission from me, please.
Okay. I don't know if this was 92, 3, or 4, but we play an early game in Buffalo at Pilot Field. There's a Sabres game that night, and Pete Weber got a bunch of us tickets. Jim, I think you were there with us. It was a Sabres Bruins game.
Yeah.
Some of the players went as well. One of those players was Mike Milchin, who was a pitcher for the Redbirds. And Mike used to have this little thing he called the everyman, where he would startle people in public restrooms by when he would use the urinal, he would take his pants and his undergarments and pull them all the way down to his ankles, which would leave his bare backside pointing out to the general public. So a period ends of the Sabres game. I'm going towards the restroom. You know how it is at a hockey game. At the end of the period, everybody's rushing so we're one of the first one. And as the door pushes open, I hear Mike say, time for the everyman. And I'm like, oh boy, here we go. So he pulls up at one urinal. I'm a few away. And then I start noticing people. The whole humorous part would be watching other people see Mike and see what their reaction would be. So I finished up a few urinals away and then went towards the sink. And then you just stand there by the door and you see all these shocked people walk in and see a grown man looking that way at the urinal and looking at each other like, what is going on here? And that was Mike Milchin. You remember Mike Milchin?
Oh, yeah.
That was the everyman. When you said Buffalo Sabres.
Holy cow.
He's freezing up on us here.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get –
There
there we go. Back.
Am I back?
Yeah.
Okay. So when you mentioned the Sabres game, I'm thinking Mike Milchin, Sabres Bruins, 1990, whatever that was. So
I do remember that. Was that one of those games where people were leaving and we'd get the tickets and go in because they were leaving? And
no, Pete Weber got us all tickets for that. We had tickets. We had seats.
Okay.
And Mike was one of those guys.
Hey, this is something we brought up during the first podcast, and I'd be interested, not so much Matt because he wasn't there at the time, but certainly Mark and Dave, of your impressions of Old Cardinal Stadium when you first went in there to work, because let's face it, it was a unique minor league ballpark, very unique. What do you guys think?
Well, from my standpoint, from a baseball standpoint, you always noticed how short right field was. But from a person who, like Dave and Matt and Nick, enjoyed imbibing after games like you did, the Stadium Club was a great feature. And things were different back then. At that point, Anheuser-Busch owned the Cardinals. They didn't own the Redbirds, but they owned the Cardinals. So beer was very prominent in the clubhouse after game. In fact, there was a keg that anybody could access in the clubhouse after the game. When we only busted 2 places, Nashville and Indy. When we did, there was beer on the bus back then, and there was cases of beer. So the Stadium Club, and God rest his soul, Danny Bannett, who was the bartender back then, who was always kind to me, though I didn't have 2 nickels to rub together many times. I don't think I ever paid for very many drinks there. The Stadium Club was the most attractive thing because Mary Barney and all the baseball people would congregate in there, and you would stay. And I don't think that happens anymore in pro baseball, much less pro sports, where even the athletes, the players would come up and they would hang out in the Stadium Club, and it was a great atmosphere.
Yeah. Dave?
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I remember, coming out of A-ball, I was in the Sally League. They were decrepit, small bandbox ballparks. And, I feel back then, mid-90s, the idea of being in AAA it was different then than it is now. It's still a big deal, but you really felt like you had climbed a major couple of rungs on the ladder to get a AAA job. And so not only was I working for a AAA team, but you walked into, it looked like a big league ballpark to me. You had the massive filters, you had the beautiful colored seats, the yellow, blue, red, green seats, right beside the highway. It just looked like you weren't in Columbus, Georgia anymore. And I remember we had at the start of the season a shortstop by the name of Joe Aversa, who was a slick field no-hit shortstop, and he was at AAA for the first time. And I remember talking to Joe Aversa at the batting cage, like right when the team got there. It might have been like their first workout. Oh, and it had turf, it had artificial turf. So that was cool too. But we were both standing there, and it was like, we were both saying, this is like going to the big leagues as we looked around. And, there were probably, maybe I could count on one hand the 3 years I worked there, that there were actually people in the right field bleachers for a Redbirds game, but they were there. The bleachers were there, and it looked like you could fit 20,000 people in there. So I think just the impression for me when I walked in there was, man, I've hit the big time.
Get your phone, Mark.
That's the president calling.
Yep.
Oh,
Mark's called for his agent already for being on this.
Can't get enough.
I'm one of the few people in the world that still has an actual landline in their house. My wife mandates that.
Wow.
Hey, I do agree, though. I agree with what Mark said about the Stadium Club. One of the first times I walked in there, I saw the big display of when George Bush 41, was at a Redbirds game. And so, a president had been there, so.
Right.
Hey, Dave, I remember that game. I know, Jim, do you remember that? We came back from a road trip, and George Bush is going to be there. And the wild thing was not the fact that they had people with rifles up on top of the stadium and all protecting the president, but do you remember during that game, I forget who the Redbirds were playing, but a fight occurred on the field. The 2 teams started a scrum. And when that happened, the Secret Service people around the president went ballistic. The sniper guys up on the roof were doing this and looking around, and it was a crazy moment when the 2 teams chose that time to scuffle on the field with the president in the stands and the Secret Service going ape crazy.
Wow. I remember trying to get into the stadium. Yeah, we had been on the road and trying to get into the stadium with which would be, I guess, aptly titled KC1, because that was the big red case that we used to have. Niels, remember that, Dave?
Yeah.
Big red case, KC1, and we had to open it up, and the security had to go through every little thing, asking what this was and what that was, and it took a long time to get in there and get that done. And then the president was there. I want to mention to Dave, the 95 season one of the things that stood out, not only that we won the championship day, but remember we played on a Saturday night in Louisville against Buffalo. And in a real rarity, that Sunday game was in St. Louis. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
I don't know how it got worked out or why it got worked out, but they moved that game to Busch Stadium, St. Louis, which would have been Busch 2, I guess. Is that right? Busch 2. You know, it had the arches at the top.
Yeah.
KC1 and Busch 2.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It might have been, no, I think it was it was KC1 and Busch 2. That's exactly right. So we go to St. Louis after the game on a Saturday night, have to drive over there, a good 4.5, 5 hour trip, and then they're playing at 1 o'clock on Sunday afternoon. What do you remember about that day in St. Louis?
I remember several things about that day.
Pete,
it was a decent idea that was completely and totally botched by the Redbirds organization. In that nobody knew about it. It was not promoted in the least. So we go over there to play. I drove over that day in a van with a bunch of the Redbirds front office people, a lot of the interns. So we get there, absolutely no one there. Now this was not part of like a double header or anything. Cardinals were on the road. So we're in an absolute empty Busch Stadium in St. Louis. Just like we teleported in there and with nobody's knowledge, but we were going to play a baseball game. So I remember getting to the press level and a couple of guys were working there and they were ticked off that they had to come in on a Sunday afternoon and fool around with this minor league baseball game. So they were a little salty. I wanted to write the lineups on the board in the press area, and they were like, "Why? Like, why do you want to do this?" So they were not very happy at all. They weren't very cooperative. But we set up in the home radio booth, and obviously you and I were in heaven. You know, we were sitting there like we were big leaguers. So we're sitting there. I think this is shortly before the game. We look around. In walks Jack Buck.
Right.
And we're both looking around in awe. There he is. He's standing at the top of the steps of the booth, and he looks down at the red case, and he points at it, and he goes, "Who carries that?"
And you said, I do.
So Jack proceeds to stand there and talk with us for a while, and now that I think about it, I think the game was actually going because you had continued the play-by-play, and I stood up on the steps and talked to Jack for a little while. And then he actually came on the air with us.
Yeah, he came on in the second inning. I had run into him earlier that morning in the press room, and he said he was going to be around. Did I want to have him on the air? And I said, yeah. What about the fifth inning? He goes, no, I won't be around in the fifth inning. What about the second inning? And I said, okay. And I do remember this. It was so incredibly hot. It may be the hottest day I ever remember in my career. It was so hot. I remember coming out of the first base dugout, walking to the third base dugout before the game, and in a total sweat. I mean,
NFL, a full lather.
A full lather. It was so hot. And in fact, Dave, you had a little heat incident during the game. You had to go lay down in the back of the booth.
You know, it was oppressively hot. And I, at that time, was going down to the field to do the Star of the Game show.
That's right.
So, you know, being stationary in the booth kind of helped cope with the heat. But, you know, around the bottom of the eighth inning or whatever, I headed down to the field, which, and you know, in the old Busch Stadium, the turf down there, it was hotter at field level than just the regular air temperature. But the Redbirds were the home team, and the MVP of that season, Ray Gianelli, hit a game-winning home run in that game. And I can't remember if it was extra innings or not, but it might have been the bottom of the ninth. But Gianelli won the game. A guy by the name of Mark Sweeney had a tremendous game. He had like 7 RBIs in that game. I think he hit a homer as well. He was my star of the game. So I powered through the interview with Mark Sweeney, came back up to the booth and just collapsed. I was spent and basically slept in the van the whole way home. But, and what a great day that was.
Yeah, I think the team was heading on to Oklahoma City after
Yeah.
the game. We spent that night in St. Louis. And I remember Diane, my wife, saying, yeah, we're going to come over from Louisville. I'm like, okay, great. But she forgot to tell me that we have no interest in coming to the game. We're only going to come over to have dinner after the game because her parents at that time lived in St. Louis, in Chesterfield. So she's like, yeah, we're going to come over to St. Louis for the day. It's like, all right. And she arrived after the game was over. She's like, no, I had no intention of coming over for the game.
There was not a soul in the stadium watching the game.
I think they announced
No one.
an attendance of like 1,500 for that game. Yeah, 1,500.
Hey, you just mentioned something that has sparked another story, if you don't mind. You mentioned Oklahoma City, and you mentioned Dave's kind of health scare there at the ballpark. Jim, you're going to have to remember this. I don't know which year it was. We're at All Sports Stadium at Dumpy Stadium in Oklahoma City.
Right.
You remember the way the booth was? When you walked into the press box, it was to the right side. It was its own little booth. It had a door, and it was really small. It could fit 2 people, but the second person was looking right at the frame of the window.
I remember that.
So after a period of time of coming there, finally you looked at me and you're like, hey, let's just do our individual innings. The other guy will sit out in the main press box, and it's just too hard. I'm like, yeah, that's fine. So we're playing a game there. I'm in the main press box right outside the door. You're in there calling the game. We don't see it, but what happens is the mascot for the Oklahoma City 89ers was standing on top of the Redbirds dugout on the first base side and backed up too far and fell into the dugout during the game. And we didn't see it. Nobody really saw it. And the game was being televised by the Oklahoma City 89ers. Brian Barnhart, and then I don't know who his analyst name was, but the analyst is going to be the main point of this conversation. So the TV is on in the press box, and I hear that, and nobody can figure out what happened. The shot of the TV screen, you can see all the Redbird players standing around somebody that is on the ground. Yeah. We don't know if it's a player or a coach. We had no idea it was the mascot that had fallen. So I peek in, and you're not sure what happened. So I'm like, I'm just going to run down, and I'm going to find out what happened. So I run down, I look in, and Bien Figueroa was there, and in his broken English said something like, he almost fell on my head, blah, blah, blah. And I figured, I see it's the mascot. So I run back up, tell you it's the mascot. Before I can do anything else, I hear the TV announcers, Brian Barnhart, great professional, and his analyst, who I don't even remember who it was. And the analyst all of a sudden spots out. He goes, you know who I think that is? I think it's Red Shandy's. He just spouts out on air, I think it's Red Shandy's. I think he's on the ground in the Redbirds dugout. And I hear that, and I go to their booth, and I whisper into Brian's ear what happened. Blah, blah, blah. No, it's your mascot. He fell in the dugout. So they finally get all that done. So I tell you what he says, and I can't stop laughing about it because it was extremely comical. So we're leaving the ballpark, and you and I see the analyst coming out. And I point, and I say, hey, there's the analyst. And Jim, being the smart aleck that he can be, he goes, hey, what did you think happened when the mascot fell into the dugout? And the guy goes, well, I'm thinking somebody's had a heart attack, somebody old. I'm thinking it's Red Shandy's. And Jim goes, well, you didn't say that on the air, did you? And he goes, oh, no, I didn't say that on the air, which obviously did because I heard it. So do you remember that, Jim?
Yeah, I do remember that.
Yeah.
I do remember that.
That was in Oklahoma City. Unfortunately, there was no social media and internet where somebody could have spread false rumors that Red Shandy's was having a heart attack in the dugout in Oklahoma City, because that was not the case.
I just remember you and I laughing about it later, like, how did he come to that conclusion? Cardinals AAA team.
Yeah.
Looked like somebody's ill, probably an older person. Who do I know in the Cardinal organization that's old? Red Shandy. Yeah, that's it. Red Shandy.
Yeah. I guess Red came to his mind first before Stan Musial, but for a moment, Red Shandy's was having health issues in Oklahoma City.
Wow, that's crazy.
Well, it's a good thing it was ticker tape back then, because then no one could tweet it, like you said. Matt, you were obviously David and Jim had the call for that '95 American Association Championship with the Redbirds. You had 3 straight division titles. You were part of the broadcast team for 3 straight division titles, with Jim for a couple of them, and then one after he left. Any good memories from the 08 through 10 seasons when the Bats won the IL West for 3 straight years? Those seem a little far away from here, actually.
Yeah, lots of good memories. And, the 10 year was then the year that Jim, was it your first year, Jim, or last year? Was it your last year in Louisville? 10?
09.
No, 9 was your last year in Louisville.
Yeah, 08 and 09.
And the Bats subsequently won the 10 division title on the last day of the season, on that Labor Day, making it 3 straight. They got a double play turn to win the division. But what sticks out about that group the most is that was largely orchestrated by one of the best AAA managers, and he's still managing, and Rick Sweet. And his coaching staff, Smokey Garrett, Mac Jenkins, Ted Power, whoever was there at the time. Those guys were great. Great to work with, easy to work with. There was a lot of talent there. The Reds were really drafting well. Those guys, of course, went on to be a part of a couple of division titles with Cincinnati. But my tenure there is known, and I think we had 5 division titles from 03 to 16. And every year in round 1, the team would lose to Durham in round 1 because the West would meet up with the South in round 1, and the Bats could never beat Durham. So that's kind of what sticks out about that. But that was a fun group, and a group by and large that was pretty much together for those 3 years. A lot of really good veterans. Kevin Barker, who I think played for the Redbirds maybe during your time, your guys' time there in the 90s. But Barker, John Atkins, Luis Bolivar, some of those guys, they were a lot of fun to be around. But Rick Sweet was – He kind of stirred it up, and Rick always at the AAA level had a great grasp on his team, and he knew what button to push ahead of time. And as you know, with the AAA level, sometimes that's to prod a guy, or sometimes it's to lay off the guy, and he seemed to always have that right answer.
Nick, let me say this about these guys. And Mark traveled with me all the time, even through '94. Isn't that right, Mark?
Well, part of the season, which was one of the reasons that I left, was a chance to go be the number 1 somewhere else and do every inning. But the decision was made during '94 that I would only make – I traveled to like Des Moines and Omaha and a few others, but not every place like I had the first year.
Okay. So the traveling for 2 started to end there. Certainly with Dave, it wasn't prevalent. And then with Matt, it was not either. But each one of these guys, and this is one of their best attributes, even though they weren't required to be at road games that they weren't technically scheduled to work, if we were going to Nashville or Indianapolis or something of that nature, and it was a weekend or they could get off, every one of them would come down and work the game. It was never a situation where they would say, you know what, I'm not scheduled to work. I'm going to lay around this weekend and take it easy. You go ahead and do the games, because in order, in my estimation, and I think everybody would agree, in order to move ahead in this business, particularly when you're in the minor leagues, you're not making much money. It's all about the love of what you are doing. And with Mark and with Dave and with Matt, any opportunity to go on the road and do a game, even though they weren't scheduled, they would go ahead and do it. And they would room with me. And we found some great restaurants in all these cities that we would go to. We still do now with Nick. And so it's got to be like a love of the profession, not just, yeah, it sounds cool to do the games. I want to do them at home. You got to do them when other people are doing other things. When the front office says, thank goodness this team is going out of town after a 5-game or 6-game homestand, we got to get out of here. And we would say, we get to go on the road and do the game. We get to keep doing the games. That's the attitude that you have to have. And all 3 of these guys had it.
Yeah, I think we love the road as much as home. And you did something for me. You did me the courtesy in '94 when they weren't traveling me to every game of tearing your Achilles and you couldn't travel for a while. And then I got to do more road games, in fact, by myself, because you didn't make a couple of road trips because you tore your Achilles. And that was the first sign that you are an old man.
That was Achilles tear number 1. I've since had
one. That's the first. Okay.
Yeah. And Mark, in New Orleans, remember I got some sort of a foot infection and my legs swelled all up and I left you down in New Orleans to finish up a series.
I got that mixed up. I knew you had an Achilles injury. It was tough keeping up with all your old man injuries at that point in time.
I did have a lot of OMIs. Yeah.
I think Jim Weber would have powered through it.
Still is
A
power.
tougher man might have.
Of course, Jim doesn't know he's hurt.
You know, guys, I'm sure Mark and Matt and Jim agree. I've worked for a lot of different teams in minor league baseball, a lot of different teams in other sports. I've never, and I mean this very sincerely, I was proud to be involved with the Louisville Redbirds. It was, I felt, a prestigious position to be in, even as a number 2 broadcaster / ticket sales person. And I've really never felt that way. Not that I don't appreciate or think highly of other organizations that employ me. I do. But I just remember feeling like that was something special. It really was. It was the people that were there. It was working with Jim. It was the relationship with the radio station. The Cardinals organization. There was something special about it. And I was only there for 3 short seasons. But to this day, both my wife, Wendy, and I talk about those 3 years as the happiest, most fun 3 years we've ever had.
That's great.
That's well said, Dave.
Yeah.
Yeah, I concur with that. And I think Dale Owens was a big part of that.
Absolutely.
Because we knew, we didn't get paid a ton of money. We didn't expect we were going to. And you always knew you were going to work hard and have fun doing it. And that all stemmed down from Dale. He was there too, all those hours, and he made it fun.
And there was that pride in showing those guys the stadium club or the restaurant across the street or a place to go, or let me take you back to your hotel. And you wanted to showcase what we have in our city. And that's exactly right.
You know, the thing that Dale brought to all of us was he never made us, he never rode herd on us about what we said or how we approached the broadcast. He let me / us decide what the format of the broadcast was going to be, how we did it, what we said, and everything that we did. He let us do it, and he was supportive of the radio broadcast. He didn't think the radio broadcast was just there as a courtesy. He really believed that the radio broadcast was vitally important to the organization. And I don't know, it's not always like that with every team. And I know I really appreciated that all those years.
Nick, a quick story about Dale that I should have probably thrown in earlier about when I started with the team, but the other guys will appreciate this. I was working in Columbus, Georgia, Class A ball club. Dale and I had kind of worked out the deal for me to come there right at the end of the season, mostly through fax and phone calls. And my team made the playoffs, and we lost in the first round of the Sally League playoffs. Well, in my youth, inexperience, exuberance, naivety, whatever you want to call it, I never talked to Dale. We never discussed a report date, like when I would start the job. But I didn't even think about it. So we lose, and the season is over. And so my wife and I, we get everything we own, the few little $100 we have to our name, loaded in a moving van, and off to Louisville we come. So we're probably talking the 6th or 7th of September, something like that. We pull into a motel or a hotel there in Jeffersontown, sleep, get up, go rent an apartment right over there off Hurstbourne Lane. As soon as we're rested up, we're going to make a trip over to the stadium and drop in and stop in. So we come into the office, the old office there at Cardinal Stadium. Dale's in his little office there. We come in, we say hello, very cordial. A lot of the other front office people are coming down the hall and we're being introduced. And so there's a bunch of us standing in Dale's office. I don't remember, Jim, if you were there or not, but you might have been. Someone says, "So when do you start?" And I thought, I don't know. Dale, who obviously also never thought of this, looks at his calendar desk, his desk calendar, reaches up, pulls the September page up, and goes, Monday, October 17th. So there I stand in Louisville in early September. And so I have this smile painted on my face that's just frozen. And both Wendy and I are doing the math. That's like 6 weeks from now till you start, 8 weeks till you get paid. How are we going to do this? But we never talked about it. So that was my introduction. We made it through, but there's a lesson learned to always kind of iron out the details.
I thought maybe you would set Dale down a little bit later on in the stadium club and say, "Look, we gotta work something out here."
We never mentioned it. I never mentioned it. He never talked about it again, and just dealt with it. But
that's good.
Kind of a funny story.
That's a great story. You guys have been so gracious with your time. Maybe to wrap things up, I know we've talked about it a lot over the course of the last hour or so, but maybe one more memory you have, one more thing to kind of put a bow on it, maybe working with Jim or Jim working with one of these guys or all these guys or whatever it may be to kind of wrap things up. And Mark, we can start with you.
I'll just say that it's very easy for me to go back. You're talking, I was in my mid-20s, not far out of school. It was a chance to call those 3 years has been a lot of fun. But it mainly just harkens on, like Nick, you were saying, and Matt and Dave and Jim, how when I got there, it was like you thought you were in the big leagues. It looked like a big league stadium. I mean, even something as subtle, and I think his first name was Bob. You tell me, our organist, Ramsey, what I mean, while I was there, the guy appeared on Russell wearing a Louisville Redbirds jersey on the Letterman show. I mean, even our organist who appeared between innings was big time, man. Everything about it said big time. It all started with Dale at the top. Working with a true pro like Jim was great, and it's 3 years that I'll always cherish. It was a blast.
Bob's still rocking it up there in the press box too.
Good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, Matt, we'll go to you next.
A couple things stick out, and a lot of it has to do with our friendships with each other. But I'll never forget the night, November of '09, when Jim calls and says, "Hey, I got the call of calls. You know, the Reds want me up there, and you know, we're all set for you to take over." And that was very important, obviously, to me and my professional time and friendship with Jim. And then Nick, when I got to, you know, have the chance to come back here to Columbus and give the reins to you, you know, I joked that team that lost a franchise record 91 games and I think it was 12 or 13 drove me to wanting a partner, because I was completely checked out the final month of that year. I think they lost 18 of their last 19, and the winning and losing got to me at that point. Now I could give a, you know what, less, but so getting you and then being able to give it to you and just the camaraderie. I mean, the fact that we've been able to put this together in 2 installments with all the good friendships and the good, just the cohesiveness we have as friends and comrades and cohorts.
Well said. And I'm very appreciative of you and that 2012 team. Dave, how about you?
Well, I don't think you could ask for a better partner than Jim. Incredible pro, talented announcer. You know, what he was able to do in the big league speaks for itself. But I just remember, as we kind of alluded to earlier, just hitting it off right away, having a comfort level in the booth to do the games. Great opportunity for me to work with Jim and to do games at a high level like that in that atmosphere was just tremendous. A couple things I think of the night, and this involves Dale Owens again as well, but we brought in the Monkees for a post-game concert. 25,000 people in Cardinal Stadium for a Monkees reunion concert. My sisters are both older than me, huge Davy Jones fans. Place is bedlam. I had mentioned to Dale that my sisters were there and that I was trying to get backstage passes. So the game ends, I come down, I'm sitting with my sisters and some other family watching the show. Up comes Dale Owens in the midst of all of this, the general manager, the orchestrator of the whole thing, finds me somehow and hands me backstage passes. And I get to take my sisters back there, and they met and had pictures taken with Davy Jones. So that was a big night. And I guess the other thing I think about is sitting in that booth with Jim at a certain time of night and having to have a baseball cap pulled down as far as you could because the sun would just burn into that booth. And the turf it was like white turf at that time of day. And I'm sure if somebody came in and looked at us, they wouldn't, their first thought wouldn't be, these are two pro broadcasters. But we got our hats pulled down as far as they would go, and we could still see out. That's what you had to do there at Cardinal Stadium.
Great stuff. And no better person to kind of put a bow on this whole thing than the voice of pro baseball in Louisville, Jim.
I just remember, and I'm so grateful for this. Mark, Dave, Matt, Joe, Todd, all these guys that I worked with had a passion for broadcasting, and we had a passion for having fun. I mean, each one of these guys I can look at and remember stories like, oh my God, we did some things that were just out of control. How did we do that? And why did we do that? But when it came time to do the work, nobody of this group and nobody of that first group, Joe and Todd, ever slouched on the work. It's like, we know what we have to get done. We get it done. We do it in a professional manner. We had our fun, yeah, but we knew when it was time to work it and do it right. And every one of them did that. So I'm really proud that we found guys that were of the same mind that I was about how to do the broadcast. We wanted it to sound like a major league broadcast. Our goal every night was to make it sound like a major league broadcast. And we always didn't do that, and we would make fun of ourselves for things that didn't work the way they were supposed to work. But the fact is, we tried hard every night to do it right. Everybody had the same mindset. And it says a lot for the fact that over the course of this day, all these guys that I have worked with, minus Matt Gorski, we've all gotten together and we have stayed in touch. I stay in touch with Mark, with Dave, with Matt. I talk with Joe and Todd every now and then, with you, Nick. So it's not like any one of us are like, that guy was an idiot. I don't talk with him anymore. It's like we all still stay in touch. We had a great time. We had great memories from those times that we were together. And it's so fun that we can share them with people now.
Well said. It has been a pleasure for me to listen to some stories.
Cheers.
and to yes, indeed, to sit here with you guys and very much appreciated. Hope everyone watching has enjoyed it too. Don't jump off right after we stop the recording here. But Mark Neely, Matt Andrews, Dave Wilson, and of course, Jim Kelch. Thank you guys all. Great fun. Really appreciate it. Everyone stay safe out there. Thanks for tuning in, and hope to see you at a
Nick.
ballpark again soon.